Hello everyone. I'm going to brush the dust off of a presentation I did last year because I really didn't have any followers at that time. This thing has maybe about 700 views or something. I forget exactly what it is, but and it's because I've commented in several other Grand Solar Minimum videos about this. But I wanted to do this because I think this is as important as our currency failing. And it's because time is disappearing on us. It's like sand going through an hourglass. You're having less and less time to prepare for this. But I did an engineering study basically of this Grand Solar Minimum, and I made this so that anybody can understand it. And I'm hoping that you'll take the time and go through this with me so that you'll have a better understanding of this and understand. The way the media portrays the sun, they portray it as this constant output star, but it is not. It has a natural variability, even in, it's like a 12-year cycle. And this image here, just even on the front of this presentation, shows the difference between the minimum and maximum in that 12-year cycle. This is a very common event that's been going on since the beginning of time. That at least our time. So I want to educate you so that you'll be able to fight back and at least adjust your mind to be able to prepare appropriately for what is coming. So let me go through this, and by no means am I saying the world is going to end or anything, but I'm just going to show you that the data shows that there are a number of different cycles, and I talk a lot about cycles to you in investing. And I mean, the sun comes up in the morning and goes down in the evening. We have day and night. That's a cycle, right? We have winter, spring, summer, and fall. Those are cycles. The sun has a number of different cycles that some are shorter, like this 12-year cycle, and other ones are much longer, like maybe around 400-year cycles. And I'm going to show you all this. I'm going to educate you based on the science, which the media keeps telling us there's science, and everybody's in agreement with. It's a bunch of BS. And so I'm going to show you what really is going on, and I'm hoping this, and I'm going to give you the information you need to be able to make decisions for yourself. Because again, sand is going through the hourglass, and we're running out of time if this is true. All right, so let's get started. So first I want to, Men in Black, there was a scene in there, and I keep trying to find a video clip that I could play, but probably YouTube would demonetize if I did anyways. But Jay said, "Man, we ain't got time for this cover-up bullshit. I don't know whether or not you've forgotten, but there's an Archelian battle cruiser that's about to," and Kay says, "There's always an Archelian battle cruiser or a Corellian death ray or an intergalactic plague that's about to wipe out all life on this miserable little planet. And the only way these people can get on with their happy lives is they do not know about it." Well, you've heard about, there's comets that could come and hit the earth. You've heard any number of things, global warming, all this. But truthfully, I think the whole global warming thing was just to raid our pocketbooks, one, but they're probably actually trying to get money to prepare for this real thing that's coming, which is actually persistent global cooling. So we're going to talk about in this presentation, and there's a normal, I think I said 12 years, it's 11-year solar cycle. There's some variation within that, but our planet's temperature trend historically has been much warmer than we've experienced during the past 5,000 years. Solar minimum and grand solar minimum definition. Our sun's output, like most things, is cyclical. Scientists documented dramatic cyclical heating and cooling patterns over the century beyond the 11-year solar cycle. A lack of sunspots appears to be a barometer of grand solar minimum formation, as well as a good indicator of the amount of cooling to expect. Variation between solar minimum cycles could be a normal solar cycle, but it appears gas giants Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter alignment, with the sun and the earth may be a significant contributor. And so I got a summary, recommended preparations, a comprehensive guide on how to mitigate persistent cold effects and food shortages. So that's the outline of pretty much the way we're going to go through this. So the first thing is, this is that cycle I was telling you about. We have a regular solar minimum and a regular solar maximum. And you can see the thing goes up and down like this. And this has a, you know, a radiance, solar flare index, and sunspot observations, and then even a radio flux. So this is the watts per meter squared being generated, and so you can see towards the maximum, you're actually going to get more energy for like your solar panels and stuff, and more heating effects for the earth. Where down here you're going to have less for your solar panels and you know, less heating of the earth. So this is a normal cycle that's been going on forever. Okay, and I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but we'll call it a Schwabe cycle. And you can look this up on Wikipedia. I reference everything here. None of this is made up. I didn't make any of this up. This is all referenced material that's publicly available information. All right, so here is a chart that people have put together using like ice core data, tree rings, etc. They've kind of combined it all together, but what they've done is they put together like the relative temperatures over a huge period of time. So this is, you know, this is AD, so we have like 2,400 years going this way, and then we got like 2,000 years going this way. So this is, well, they're saying roughly 4,500 years of data. And even in this time, look at the tremendous differences in temperature. So this was way up here, and yet fairly recently, back in the 1600s, we were way down here. So don't let anybody tell you that, you know, we're significantly warmer than we've ever been, and you know, and don't let them tell you that the Earth is like a constant temperature when you can see these variations. And one of the trends that I don't like what I see here, and again, I'm a engineer and I'm looking for things, right? We have lower highs, so you notice this is kind of coming down, and then you have lower lows. Okay, so you can see this is a cycle where something's happening, where we're going really cold, and then we're going colder, and now we're going colder, and then what do you think this next one's going to be? It's going to be off the chart. So this chart really concerns me when I see stuff like this, because this would indicate we're going to go into something. Now what's curious is these guys, somebody must have looked at this chart and said, you can't show the next one's going to be super low, and they all of a sudden made it magical. It's going to go way up here by 2036. Well, when you look at this chart, what do you think is going to happen? Is it going to go way up, or is it going to go down? Guess what? It's going to go down, and go down further than what it had done before. All right, so solar minimum is the low activity trough of the 11-year solar cycle, that first chart that I showed. The grand solar minimum is a period of several successive very low Schwabe cycles, usually coinciding with the phase of climate disruption and a long run cooling. An example is the Maunder minimum, and you can go look up the Maunder minimum. That was a tremendously cold period of time where, you know, like in England, I think it's called the Thames River, it never thawed out in the summertime. They basically didn't have a summer. So they had parties out there on the Thames in supposedly the middle of summer when the river was still frozen over. Not good. And you think about 400 or more years ago, we didn't have near the population we have now, and people had lived in more rural agrarian type societies, and you could still hunt, you could do a lot of things. Today, I mean, you live in a city, where are you going to get your food if there is no food? You don't, a lot of people, like when I lived in Florida, you had a postage stamp yard. You couldn't even grow anything substantial to sustain yourself. You have septics that are controlled by the city and everything. You didn't have your own water. It was controlled by the city. And, you know, you think about these things might start freezing up and not operating. So what are you going to do? Biggest problem is going to be food, though. So the Little Ice Age was the coldest period of the last 8,000 years, possibly the entire Holocene period. Grand solar minima recur in clusters about every 200 to 400 years. And I'm going to show a chart of that later. So So we're in grand solar minima about 1/6 of the time. Scientists identified a high correlation between sunspots and the Earth temperature for the last several thousand years. A large amount of sunspots correlate to warmer temperatures on the Earth, just like the solar maximum, right? And conversely, less solar spots correlate to cooler temperatures on the Earth. Scientists also use sunspots as a guide to know where we are in the solar cycles. As previously stated, the solar activity is dominated by the 11-year Schwabe cycle on an interannual timescale. The recent level of solar activity after the 1940s was very high, corresponding to a grand solar maximum, which are typical but rare events in solar behavior. However, this grand maximum ceased after cycle 23, which was 2009. So they've been keeping track of these cycles. And so you'll see in the next couple charts that they'll actually show the numbers of these cycles. And I mean, this goes way back to the Chinese. They were keeping track of this. So if you're in like cycle 26, you multiply that times 11, and that tells you how many years those cycles have gone through. So let's do that, 26 times 11. So that's 286 years. All right, so now let's look at this chart, because this is really interesting. So this is showing the sunspot count, and what they're showing is during this Maunder minimum period here, the sunspots went to 0 for an extended period of time. And this is when that period where they had no summers. It basically was cold all the time, and winters were even colder, right? But summers were such that, you know, snow never melted. So if they had snow, it just kept piling up for, this is almost like a century here, right? It occurred, and then all of a sudden the sun started waking up, and you can see it was going. And then they had a small lower level, not nearly as bad as the Maunder minimum, but they called this the Dalton minimum, and it was a pretty cool period. They had another section here which was a little bit above this, but we just hit a grand solar minimum. You can see where it peaked way up, and now you notice it's declining. And they're calling this the Eddy minimum. Now, to keep in mind, when we go through a grand solar minimum, they typically average about 90 years. You can see this is a long period of time where there's no solar activity. So we'll just have to see how this works and figure out, you know, where we're going. Again, this is all referenced where you can go look up this information. And I even looked in this period here, which was relatively close period of time. In 1899, we had some really cold temperatures all the way down, even down to Florida. They got, you know, -2 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like unheard of. I mean, you're lucky in a lot of these spots, Tallahassee, to, you know, even see freezing, and they got down to -2 degrees. So that's a tremendous cold. Louisiana, same thing. What was that? -18. It's hard for me to see this far away. All right. So this is now, instead of a longer period of time, this is looking in a shorter period of time. So we're now looking from 1742 instead of the early 1600s, and this is showing the you know, where we're at. This projection, I've got an updated chart that'll show this, but we're actually way down here at this point now. And they're expecting cycle 25 to be just this little blip. And we'll have to see what happens. All right, so here we go. Now we're looking at zooming in for just the last 3 cycles now. This is 1985, and the same thing. See this declining trend that's occurring? And we're falling off to where there's just no sunspots at all. So this was up to date as of December. I probably need to go find the more up-to-date chart, but that's it's not going to be significantly different than this. All right, so back in the 70s, we launched a satellite to look at the overall Earth temperatures rather than these ground-based. Most people don't realize, you know, we've got thermometers set up like at airports, big concrete runways, these, you know, so you're getting a lot of thermal mass heating effects from the sun and everything, rather than maybe out in the middle of the woods or something. And so we took a lot of the thermometers offline in Siberia, and so we're actually, which is a consistently cooler place than maybe, we would have in a desert area. So when you take those offline, that's going to bias the temperatures higher, right? So unfortunately, you really can't trust the data. But the satellite data is unbiased. It's scanning, the whole Earth and averaging up the temperatures, and so what it's showing, and this is a very short period of time in the Earth, time period, our, even human history, but they were showing this upward trend that was occurring, but then all of a sudden it retraced and is now falling pretty rapidly. I should go find the latest data, but what's happened is I drew a line back here to show that we're now approaching to like 1998 temperatures. And so this is showing that, all this global warming stuff, everybody's been upset. They've been talking about this for, way back here a long time. And so, but we went through a maximum that went all the way through to about 2009. And so now this is going to start falling off. All right, so I went and grabbed these solar minimums that I could find historically listed, and so we had from 1040 to 1080 AD, that was 40 years, 1150 to 1200, 50 years, 1270 to 1350, and these are, in front of this chart over here. Spore was 90 years, Maunder minimum was 90 years, Dalton minimum was 56 years, so the Eddy minimum is how many years? I don't know if you look at the average of these things, but remember that first chart where it kept getting worse and worse and worse, so we'll just have to see what happens. All right, so they've actually had an idea that maybe when all of the large planets are on one side of the sun and the Earth is on this side of the sun, it affects the sun's behaviors, and it makes it maybe go into a deeper sleep. But things have just lined up again, and they're expecting, full planet-wide cooling in a winter of 2019 and 2020. Well, guess what? That's this year now. It's here. And the coldest will be 2028 to 2032, and we're going to talk about that we may not have any food production during this period. But look at what's happening already, where we have just huge flooded areas because our what's that cycle called? Because the jet stream is not functioning like it used to be, so we don't have, where weather patterns kind of flow across the country like they used to. Now things kind of stall and just have been completely saturating the middle of the country, which is our breadbasket. So here's an interim summary. We appear to be heading towards a moderate minimum type cooling. The Earth's weather is exiting a relatively warm period and unfortunately entering a time of persistent cold, and will have major impact on our agricultural zones. Food production will roughly be limited to between 40 degrees latitude north and south of the equator as the sun hibernates. Major consequences theorized: dramatic temperature changes, persistent cold temperatures, floods, drought, crop failures, solar coronal mass ejections. So I haven't talked about that yet. Back in the 1800s, there was something called the Carrington Event, and basically the sun had this huge ejection of solar particles that fried all our telegraph offices, telegraphs across the country, and actually set a bunch of buildings on fire. If that happens now with our modern grid, I mean, we could potentially burn down cities because of this, and we would be out of power, blow up all the transformers, where power probably wouldn't come back for 10 years, and we'd have significant loss of life. So, but that can kind of happen about any time, but for some reason it looks like this is more prevalent, during the sun's quiet phase, which seems counterintuitive. But increased volcanic activities, earthquakes, and wars. And there's going to be wars over food and resources, right? Like there always has, but they get heightened at this point when their people are starving. All right, so I found this chart on, I think this is USGS or something, but this is all the different types of climatic environmental type risks that you can have. So you have earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes. And so when you look at this map, you're trying to find a safe zone, but you're also looking at these lines, because this is the 40-degree latitude, and then this is what they call the Mason-Dixon line. So the question is, if you're, as I said before, food may go offline above this line, but it also could be intermittent in this area. So below this line, you have a better chance, perhaps, if because the cold is going to be flowing down. I mean, it's going to be, like I said, persistent, nonstop. All right, so this is a chart that David Devine has put together from his particular website, and but I also found this on Armstrong Economics. So this has been several people have put this together, and they've identified that there's been tremendous changes in our climate that have collapsed, major civilizations, and China is one of the ones that's highlighted in here because they have such a long history. And you can see when we went through these grand solar minimums, each one of these, they had significant problems. It's probably not 100% correlation, but it's pretty doggone good. All right, so what does this mean to us? Civilizations tend to collapse during these periods. I suspect due to food scarcity. Governments, but think about, heating and everything else. If we're trying to do like solar and wind and all this stuff, and you have extreme cold, which means you're going to have tremendous cloudiness, the solar is not going to work. The wind things are going to get screwed up with ice on them and probably be breaking them, but you're going to need tremendously more power I think it takes a lot more energy for heating than it does for cooling. So just think about that. How are the governments going to compensate for that? Governments around the world will try to control the coming collapse. I believe this is one of the reasons why governments are supporting fracking oil all over the world, even though there's no energy recovered on investment. Business case to support this approach. Additionally, they recently opened up coal again, which the USA is said to have hundreds of years of reserves. We need the energy to mitigate what's coming. This can be a major impact to the world for decades to come, 40 to 90-year period. If history repeats, there will be years with no summer. North of the Mason-Dixon line will be significantly impacted. Fall crops will not survive, like what occurred in 2017, where 30% of the wheat crop was destroyed due to early frost. Citizens in large cities don't have food producing capability. The link below documents the modern minimum 400 years ago. This video is tainted by some global warming garbage, but otherwise pretty good documentary. And I'll put this in the description so that you can get it. So projections, food and energy, both will become intermittent and expensive. Prices will be managed price fixing by the federal government to reduce the appearance of gouging. People will be forced to set up home gardens like Victory Gardens in World War II, raise chickens, rabbits, etc. But I want you to realize when they go to price fixing, what happens is those things just go offline because people are not going to grow things at a loss. So they'll just till their harvest in and say, oh, okay, nobody gets it. That's just the way it works. They're not going to do things to, give away their wealth. People need to immediately improve their homes by adding insulation and supplemental heating, wood coal stoves, gas fireplaces, etc. And I would highly recommend you do like the wood or coal stoves, and you get yourself a significant pile. Like I've got cords and cords of wood that are ready to be split, but stuff that's already split and undercover and cured or seasoned, they call it, because more people die from cold than they do from hot. Housing, people that have the financial resources to relocate south of the Mason-Dixon line. Multiple generations will likely need to cohabitate like in the past. They need to have a couple acres which can be farmed and grow animals to survive. Those that don't have adequate financial resources are likely to perish. The cold climate is tough to endure. Estimate 15-25% of the population loss worldwide, best case, and that's if we keep our power up. Medicine, plagues will likely propagate rapidly. And this is kind of what happened when remember bubonic plague and everything? Everybody was huddled together because of the extreme cold, and that's when these diseases are passed on. Power and water utilities, power lines down, water pipes bursting, public sewer systems failing. If power is lost for months or more, then we will lose more than half the population, since people in cities are unable to be self-sufficient. But also think about hospitals only have power for a few hours with generators, and you think about the nursing homes and everything else. Unfortunately, the weakest of us will not make it. People that are on recurring drugs for support also are going to have significant problems. I think about diabetes and everything with insulin and everything. If there's no refrigeration and there's no production, it's going to be a problem. So the potential for a mass die-off. If a mass die-off occurs, our advanced society will struggle to maintain electricity, telecoms, food production, distribution, sanitation, medicine, etc. I think 20% of the population in Europe perished during the bubonic plague and such. And so think about that. That's 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 people. Look around. I mean, everything is so complex today. If you start losing that many people, you're not going to be able to maintain what we have. Already during the 2017-2018 winter, temperature records were broken dating back 100 years. In North Georgia, we typically average 1 inch of snow each winter, yet we received 7 inches last winter. In 2018 fall, some areas received as much snow in a couple days as what was typical for a year. Now, it turns out this past year, 2018-2019 in North Georgia, we didn't get any snow this year at all, which was unexpected. So we'll have to see what happens in 2019-2020 winter. In a couple years, we'll be breaking 200 and 300-year-old records, and by then it'll be too late to prepare. Professor Valentina Sargova's research indicates that from 2019 to 2027, we will have reduced food output, but from 2028 to 2032, there will be zero food output. I can only assume then food will come back online after this period, but very slowly over the next 50 to 70 years. In the USA, most homes, apartments, and businesses no longer have supplemental heating in the event of a long duration power outage. In North Georgia, where I live, we have 2-stage HVAC heat pumps which cut out about 15 to 20 degrees, and then the HVAC runs on heat strips, which is a huge electric bill and strain on utilities. Most other areas like Florida only use single-stage heat pumps, and they cut out around 30 to 40 degrees. Many homes in North Georgia have supplemental wood and gas fireplaces, but some do not. I believe we need to prepare by becoming as self-sufficient as possible by developing our own food sources and mitigating the effects of persistent cold. And I don't remember if I talk about this later, but I'm talking about canning as well. You grow a bunch of food and you put it away. And when you can like non-acidic type stuff, it's good for like 5 to 10 years in that canned stuff. The mason jars, and get yourself a bunch of rice and beans, and get the freeze-dried foods, get a bunch of seasonings. It's going to take a lot, and then you got to also make sure you have a significant water supply. Our antiquated electrical system will likely not meet demand. It takes years to bring new power plants online. It seems unlikely this will happen without tremendous effort. So I put in a significant solar system, and I'm putting in batteries this year, and so that I'll be able to maintain, like some semblance of lighting and even, refrigeration and that kind of stuff. Transportation will be dramatically affected due to impassable roads, river ice dams causing flooding of roads, businesses, etc. Imagine years where the snow never melts and piles up year after year. So let's say you're in the Northeast and you're used to getting 3 feet of snow or something each year, and there's some get more. Can you imagine after 50 years, 150 feet of snow? Where are you putting it? It never melts. That's going to be a problem. And the density of those areas, it's just amazing. You got no place to go. All right, so here's the step-by-step details. All right, I specifically have gone after and purchased cold hardy chickens. I did get Rhode Island Reds, but there are a number of different chickens that you can get that are cold hardy. And I also have a whole bunch of raised beds, and I'm now developing another large food plot in my yard. So I have, like right now, say 16 by 40 feet is one area, and then I have another area that's probably about another 16 by 40 feet, and now I'm developing a 50 by 120 foot section. You're gonna have to figure out how to do this, and because food is going to become incredibly expensive, and so you need to be able to get your own food. Rain catchment. Some of the cities will fight you on this, but right now, if you live more in the country, they leave you alone. And so I've got about 6,000 gallons right now, but I plan on getting a well that I can run off of my solar and everything, and so that's on the list this year as well. So I argue you really need to get away from big cities, because they're going to be potentially death traps. You need to get to where you can be as self-sufficient as possible. Try to find yourself a newer home with really good insulation, double pane windows, attic insulation, all this stuff. My house was very limited in the insulation in the attic, and I put like close to an R80 insulation, because when I was running my wood stoves, it was just escaping right out the top of my house. Now my house stays nice and cozy. So energy, you need to potentially get yourself a generator. So like in this case, I've got solar and I've got batteries, but during the winter time there's so much cloud cover and everything, you may need to have a generator too that you have to run periodically. And I've got a big propane tank buried in the ground, but it's a biofuel. I converted it so it can run off of gasoline or propane. Let's see, grid-tied solar. Security. You need to think about security too, because you got to protect what you got. So I like large dogs. I like fences. I like good sight lines. Make sure you got stuff for oh, and I forgot to talk about rabbits up here too. Rabbits are excellent cold hardy animals. Barter, liquor, cigarettes, silver, eggs, rabbits, chickens, all that stuff is going to be excellent barter. Wealth preservation, gold, silver, other tangible assets. Community, coordinate with like-minded people. All right, so this is important, and I forgot to even mention, if you go buy a property in the country, do not get an HOA. Keep away from the HOA, because you don't need anybody telling you anything about what to do with your property. So right now, I'm going to tell you we're halfway through 2019. You got till 2027 to get straight, and my channel talks about a lot of things. I've got an outside cooking area. If I got to, I can cook using wood that I've saved for my fireplaces. I got a wood splitter, hydraulic. It's actually a kinetic log splitter. Extensive gardening, still learning, but it's coming together. Just you've got to think through this. This is going to be something that you can't rely on anything from the government, because they're going to have a hard time feeding themselves. So this is going to be a hunker down time, and you're going to have to do the math. In my channel, I've done the math on a lot of this, how much food you're going to have to store depending on how many people you got to take care of. Think about your family members. A lot of your family members don't have a clue about what's going on. If you get woken up, it's going to be hard for them to recognize what you're now seeing, and you're going to have to try to take care of as many people as you can. I talk about being like the Joseph in the Bible. You're going to be the one that's going to be responsible for your family, your community, potentially. Not saying that you need to save your city, but you may have to help people in the city understand that they got to prepare. So, but you got to do the best you can. That's really what I keep telling everybody. It's like, I hope everybody's treating you well. I hope you're doing well. Make sure you do the best you can. God bless.